I felt to be allowed to learn about the history of the feminist movement and enlightened to discover the seemingly absurd inequalities of the past. These inequalities, endured by women and, consequently, men, directly or indirectly, included bans on women accessing contraception, education, and employment. The denial of the right to vote, the right to refuse sexual consent to husbands, and protection from sexual harassment and domestic violence. The right to abortion, and more. All were legitimate historical issues that I genuinely believe all men and women should seek to understand within the context of tradition, religious beliefs, technology, economics, and medical advancements relevant to those periods in time. Beyond the academic content of a women's studies class, I was exposed to perspectives I had never previously considered. My enrollment in women's studies at university consisted of 3 classes a week, each lasting up to 2 hours, supplemented by several field excursions to women's shelters, female stand-up comedy shows, female artist exhibitions, vegan restaurants, teaching in underprivileged black neighborhoods around Los Angeles, and a public reading of the Vagina Monologues, an almost biblical text to feminism at the time. Though I was actively banned from participating in the public reading because I didn't have a vagina, I was so supportive of the class and its mantra that I was completely blinded to its slowly emerging hypocrisy, hostility, and marginalization. Together, as more than just a class, we had adventures and endless discussions about the writings and research of prominent feminists who had gone before us. Beyond the academic study of feminist literature, we explored and shared our feelings and fears about everything, resulting in an immense bond among us. We were one, and we thought and behaved as one, forever looking to our leader, the teacher, for moral assurance that what she preached was right and that anything contrary was inherently wrong. She was our leader, and we were her loyal followers. In retrospect, I now see that this was the first stage of the indoctrination process. I belonged to something much bigger than myself, and everyone cared about me, just as I cared about them. It sounds odd even as I write this, but we truly became a very close family in a short time. Even as a confident young man on exchange with countless new friends and opportunities, the class was so righteous and just in its cause that I wanted to belong to it completely. Now, I see how easily one could be entirely swept away by it if lacking the confidence and security of an alpha, sigma, or omega male or female. I see how its power could be amplified in a young person away from home for the first time, desperately trying to fit in and make friends. For anyone unsure, hurt, angry, alone, or scared, such a class provided a comforting sense of belonging. An even greater movement filled with righteous feminists fighting together for moral superiority over everyone and everything. We were comforted by the prescribed readings, the guidance of the lecturer, and the belief that anything supporting minorities under the banner of feminism was inherently good and beyond question. After all, if feminism is about fighting for both genders and fairness, how could anyone possibly oppose it? Disturbingly, however, as the weeks went on, I saw the logical student devolve into something neither moral nor kind, let alone logical or reasonable. Initially, the class had been an informative and intellectual discussion on the legitimate inequalities of the early 1900s. I was fortunate to be part of a group of young intellectuals discussing such powerful issues. Sadly, however, by the second month, and 70 years forward on feminism's historical timeline, I observed a significant shift, from intellect and reason to emotion and anger, from history and solutions to fictitious stories and revenge. The transformation was as catastrophic as it was tragic. Inevitably, the emotion and anger, fueled by the self-proclaimed man-hating lesbian lecturer, morphed the class's purpose from facts and logic to hate and retaliation. Essentially, the message shifted from, "Let's see how far we've come. Women are empowered," to, "We are more oppressed than ever, and men are sexist pigs who must pay. We must fight the white patriarchy." As time passed, the anger and hostility grew, and consequently, the less I, the now clearly identified enemy, was allowed to have an opinion or even ask a question. Being a feminist now meant hating men, all men, even the good ones, and especially the white ones. I began to wonder if I was expected to hate myself because of my gender and race. At the beginning, of course, I had the freedom to speak within what I now recognize as a safe space. Unfortunately, the complete shift in the class's intent and direction resulted in me being viewed as an outsider by my peers. Despite having been part of the class from day one, and even though I was the actual minority in both gender and nationality in both the class and the entire university, I was confused. The course started as a call to treat everyone as an individual and be fair. Yet I was now being treated as part of a collective, marginalized for being different, and blamed for injustices that occurred long before my grandfather was even born. This wasn't the first time I had been treated differently because of my gender or nationality. Having lived in Spain for a year at age 19, I had regularly endured racial slurs and poor treatment at school, in the dorms, on the streets, or while shopping, solely because of my nationality. The British are not the most popular people in Spain, and I was continually misidentified as British because of my appearance. Further, while working for the government in South Korea for nearly 2 years, my manager made it clear in an unashamed discussion that I could not and would not be promoted because I was white. Having also worked in female-dominated education systems, I was no stranger to being treated adversely because of my gender or race. What floored me in the women's studies class in the US was that, unlike my previous experiences of racism and sexism, this class was allegedly designed to teach inclusion. Feminism and women's studies were presented as movements aiming to end all inequalities. Yet here we were, willingly and knowingly participating in sexist conduct to actively ensure inequalities. I began to wonder, is this really about bringing us together or forcing us apart? Is it about inclusion or exclusion? Is this what feminism really looks like? Many of the subjects we studied seemed contradictory. At first, I was comfortable raising points that appeared overlooked. For example, without the actions of men in the first and second waves of feminism, the movement could never have gained traction. Even the original suffragettes acknowledged this repeatedly. I recall a case study where Western men had created the contraceptive pill, yet the old-fashioned government had not yet legalized it for women, primarily due to Christian social beliefs held by both men and women at the time. Risking life, limb, and liberty, white men illegally designed, manufactured, and imported these medicines specifically for women, distributing them for free through clandestine maritime drops at night. Rowing out into the sea in complete darkness, other men would recover the floating deliveries previously cached by feminist-supporting men. This case study, and many more like it, reinforced my support for the cause, as it highlighted how countless good men had played a crucial role in enabling the feminist movement from the very beginning. Yet, for whatever reason, our class refused to acknowledge the contributions of men. That wasn't part of the curriculum or discussion, as it would have humanized an enemy intended to be demonized. Another case study among the many we explored was presented as a positive example of feminism. However, fueled by logic and reason, I was the first and only student to question the hypocrisy of its meaning. Madam C.J. Walker was an incredible entrepreneur who defied the overwhelming odds stacked against her. Born to 2 former slaves in 1876 in the US, she rose from poverty to become the first black female millionaire. While she is primarily famous for this achievement and for inventing the first hair straightening formula, used predominantly by black women, her true accomplishment, in my and the class's opinion, lay in her empowerment of poor black women through education, employment, and opportunity. Amid her business success, Madam Walker employed, trained, and educated thousands of black women across America, lifting generations out of poverty and creating unimaginable opportunities for them and their families. It's an inspiring story of the advancement of oppressed women that continues to resonate with me today. So, where is the hypocrisy in this within the context of feminism? While I had no problem with her business model, the double standard lay within the product itself. Just 1 week earlier, the class had delved deep into the argument that white people allegedly forced black people to assimilate to white beauty standards, particularly regarding female beauty. Feminist theory claimed that black women straightening their hair or lightening their skin was an act of white oppression over black minorities. Moreover, this same theory insisted that any beauty practices or expectations imposed on women were a direct result of their exploitation and oppression by men, specifically white men. Yet, a week later, we were learning about and glorifying a black woman who made millions from black women straightening their hair and investing their lives in the beauty industry, an industry we, as feminists, had just been taught was an oppressive tool of male objectification. In this case study, there were neither men nor white people involved at any stage of the story. Nonetheless, it was presented as an empowering and liberating tale, despite being rooted in an industry supposedly counter to the feminist movement. At this point, I began to see one of the first and most pertinent rules of fourth-wave feminism. Rule 1. There are two standards, one for white men and another for everyone else. When I pointed out the contradiction, the teacher quickly brushed it aside, claiming I had missed the point. While I understood her perspective, that Madam Walker's story was an inspiring tale of female empowerment, she refused to acknowledge the double standard that allowed a beauty entrepreneur to be celebrated only if she was black or female. This was when the monster of third and fourth wave feminism first revealed its illogical and hypocritical head. It was still early in the semester, so I didn't dwell on the topic much. We continued reading, listening, learning, discussing, and exploring. Then, about 3 months into the course, the teacher began explaining the inequality of men in the home, accusing all men of being lazy and abusive. I had never encountered this claim before, and given that I had always been proactive about cleanliness, hygiene, and order, I simply could not relate to the accusation. It further confused me because, in the first half of the semester, we had been taught never to objectify, categorize, or marginalize an individual based on their gender. Yet, from this point onward, that was precisely what the class did at every opportunity, objectifying and discriminating against individuals based on their gender and race. At this stage, I still felt some level of permission to speak, so I stated, "Well, I do a lot around the home. Actually, I do pretty much everything. I don't think it's fair to say all men are lazy just because some women may have chosen to marry a lazy loser." The class fell silent, looking to the lecturer for a response. In hindsight, I believe they were looking to their leader to determine how they should react. "Bob, what do you mean by that?" she asked condescendingly. Feeling the tension in the room rise, but still believing I was in a safe space, I replied logically, "A relationship is between two people, hopefully two adults. If two adults in a relationship together can't figure out what is right and fair in the home, I don't think it's society's fault. I think it's a bad relationship. For example, I do everything around the home, but if I were in a relationship with a woman who was lazy and did nothing, I would ask her to help. If she still did nothing, it wouldn't be fair to generalize all women as lazy. Instead, I would take control of my own life and relationships, making decisions accordingly. Essentially, if someone is dating a lazy partner who doesn't contribute, they should take responsibility for their choices and leave if necessary. I think it's sexist to label an entire gender as lazy based on the actions of some." She sighed, shaking her head. "Bob, I can't believe you'd say this. How can you possibly think this way?" I was stunned by the question. As the only man in the class, I suddenly felt cornered, singled out, and vulnerable to a sexist attack, in a subject supposedly aimed at stopping sexism. I believed then, as I do now, that individuals have the power to choose whom they live with. A strong, empowered, and equal woman should have the strength, power, and intellect to walk away from a loser. Yet, feminism seemed to refuse to acknowledge personal responsibility, instead blaming all men collectively for individual women's choices. Reluctantly, I backed down, forced to accept blame for women I had never met. This was when I learned the next fundamental rule of fourth-wave feminism. Rule 2. A woman is an individual who is free and powerful to choose whatever she wants. However, no man is allowed to have an opinion on her choices, yet all men must be held accountable for them. From that point on, I lost the support of the teacher and, gradually, the support of the class. The course continued to spiral into ideological indoctrination, painting women as eternal victims while villainizing men, particularly white men. Over time, the class that had once been an engaging learning environment transformed into an echo chamber where questioning any aspect of feminism was met with hostility. Rule 3. Questioning anything within fourth-wave feminism is not permitted. Any question posed to introduce logic or even a tiny slice of perspective was treated with absolute disdain, anger, and sensationalism. I began to believe that women were repulsed by men's attraction to them while paradoxically fixating on body image and appearance. The class discussions revolved around the relationship between a woman and her body, particularly her vagina. What I couldn't comprehend was the contradiction of a woman claiming she did not want to be attractive, yet continually emphasizing women's bodies, attractiveness, or redefining what it meant to be sexy. Surely, not all women sought physical approval from other women, or did they? This led me to the next rule of fourth-wave feminism. Rule 4. You must be obsessed with body image while blaming all men for your obsession. By the third month, I had been silenced and ostracized entirely from the class. The curriculum seemed to make me less informed rather than more, and I struggled to grasp what feminism truly stood for. At the time, I had not yet fully distinguished the differences between first, second, third, and fourth-wave feminism, because the professor presented them as one consistent movement. This was a key indoctrination technique, erasing distinctions to remove perspective. Without perspective, logic was lost, and without logic, all that remained was raw emotion. Acting solely on emotion, devoid of perspective and reason, often leads to irrational behavior. This was the fundamental flaw in a movement operating under the stolen banner of feminism. It was driven by irrational emotion, fostering division and resentment rather than unity and empowerment. This realization led me to the next rule. Rule 5. There is no room for logic, truth, reason, love, or synergy. Nonetheless, I continued attending class, eager to learn but too fearful to speak. During check-ins, a routine part of class, I no longer felt safe sharing my thoughts, and instead remained silent for the rest of the semester. The professor appeared satisfied that dissenting voices had been permanently silenced, reinforcing yet another principle. Rule 6. Publicly shame and socially ostracize anyone who challenges the movement to ensure only the loudest voices are heard. When it came time for assessments, I tried my best to regurgitate the professor's views. Yet, I consistently scored at the bottom in every assignment. Perhaps I was only capable of excelling in every subject except women's studies. Who knew? The course's immense focus on poverty was strikingly selective, addressing only poverty experienced by women or non-white individuals. For instance, as an exchange student in the US, I faced extreme financial hardship. I often ate just one meal a day. Though I attended a prestigious university, I was self-funded, struggling to afford even the basics. Despite my challenges, my economic hardship was ignored. When I requested to submit assignments via email due to the high cost of printing, my professor refused, openly penalizing me for my poverty while simultaneously lecturing on the importance of fighting economic discrimination. This experience revealed another principle. Rule 7. White men are never to be afforded help, even if it is your job to assist them. Despite the turmoil of women's studies, I enjoyed my broader experience as an exchange student in the US. I was dating, playing rugby, attending parties, working part-time, and handling my academic workload. The friendships I had initially formed in class deteriorated as many of my female classmates transformed into bitter self-proclaimed victims, convinced of their oppression by an omnipresent patriarchal force. By semester's end, nearly half had broken up with their boyfriends. The drastic change in my classmates' attitudes revealed another fundamental principle. Rule: the survival and expansion of fourth-wave feminism rely on exploiting the insecurities of young women and self-doubting men. I had genuinely cherished my time with my classmates. The first 2 months were filled with laughter, intellectual exploration, and camaraderie. We shared thoughts, experiences, and adventures, from exploring Los Angeles to volunteering in impoverished communities. I had considered these women my friends. Gender and sexuality had never been an issue, until one encounter stood out. A female classmate held my hand during a car ride back to campus, initiating physical contact. This memory remained innocent, but the irony struck me. This same woman had earlier accused a man of sexual harassment for merely complimenting her at a club. This experience underscored the first lesson the class had taught me. There are two standards, one for white men and another for everyone else. The feminist disdain toward men led me to wonder how many women, brainwashed into fearing all men as predators, had missed out on genuine, innocent moments of human connection. These fleeting yet significant experiences, from a casual touch to a meaningful relationship, were lost to the rigid, emotion-driven doctrine of fourth-wave feminism. This principle led to another conclusion. Rule 9. If I can't experience love, lust, romance, or intimacy, no one can, especially not any man or an attractive young woman who still has a chance. Before studying in the US, I had spent a year in Barcelona, where I encountered a starkly different culture. European women embraced femininity, confidence, and romance. They valued their health, character, and beauty. Unlike their fourth-wave feminist counterparts, they appreciated masculinity as much as I appreciated their femininity. They saw romance and intimacy as natural and fulfilling rather than predatory or oppressive. This contrast between cultures highlighted the tragic reality for many Western men. It led me to another conclusion. Rule 10. If you're a man who wants to protect your career and reputation, never approach, compliment, or ask out a Western woman. In most cases, it's safest not even to look at her, as that too is now considered harassment. By the final weeks of women's studies, the gender divide was so severe that conversations with my classmates had become impossible. I was the evolving alpha male they could not indoctrinate or immobilize. Though they tried, I refused to abandon logic and reason. The professor's attempts to reshape my worldview failed because I understood the difference between right and wrong without needing artificial or hijacked labels. Looking back, I realize how significant this experience was, not just for me, but for everyone in the Western world. Feminism initially appears noble and just. It presents itself as a moral crusade above reproach. It demands unwavering belief, branding any dissent as heresy. Over time, its adherents shift from advocating logic, truth, and equality to embracing anger, resentment, and discrimination. Fourth-wave feminism mirrors past religious extremism, where questioning doctrine was met with persecution. Today, logic is deemed hate speech, just as scientific inquiry was once deemed blasphemy. Many who identify as feminists genuinely believe they are fighting for equality. I was one of those people for nearly 2 decades. However, while first and second wave feminism may have fought for true equality, the third and fourth waves have nothing to do with equal rights, or even women. Fourth wave feminism is a political and social movement with its own agenda. Anyone who does not fully submit, regardless of gender, race, or identity, is labeled an enemy. Dissenters are bullied, threatened, socially and financially destroyed, and even physically attacked under the guise of fighting hate speech. This movement has no consequences for its discrimination and double standards. It operates freely under banners such as safe spaces, women's studies, affirmative action, and equal rights, all while fostering division and resentment. Yet, the loudest voices do not necessarily reflect the majority. Fortunately, the Western world is beginning to recognize the difference between feminism and fourth-wave feminism. The latter has become one of the greatest threats to synergy, economic prosperity, love, and national stability in modern history. To revive, and in summary, these are the 10 rules of fourth-wave feminism. Rule 1. There are two standards, one for white men and another for everyone else. Rule 2. A woman is an individual who is free and powerful to choose whatever she wants. However, no man is allowed to have an opinion on her choices, yet all men must be held accountable for them. Rule 3. Questioning anything within fourth-wave feminism is not permitted. Rule 4. You must be obsessed with body image while blaming all men for your obsession. Rule 5. There is no room for logic, truth, reason, love, or synergy. Rule 6. Publicly shame and socially ostracize anyone who challenges the movement to ensure only the loudest voices are heard. Rule 7. White men are never to be afforded help, even if it is your job to assist them. Rule 8. The survival and expansion of fourth-wave feminism rely on exploiting the insecurities of young women and self-doubting men. Rule 9. If I can't experience love, lust, romance, or intimacy, no one can, especially not any man or an attractive young woman who still has a chance. Rule 10. If you're a man who wants to protect your career and reputation, never approach, compliment, or ask out a Western woman. In most cases, it's safest not even to look at her, as that too is now considered harassment.